Hi, my name's Emma and let's talk spooky stuff. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about Fear Street, and this is going to be a spoiler video just because I know a lot of you who love horror like I do have watched the series or the trilogy and you're very excited to unpack what we've just all witnessed. So I wanted to do a video that kind of summed up my thoughts on it, but then also I wanted to include what I got out of it, what homages I saw, and what little bits of inspiration I think it draws from other horror films. So I'm very excited to break that down with you. Today I am going to rank the series with my favorites, so make sure you put your ranking right now in the comments down below. Let me know what order you liked the films. Was it 1, 2, 3? Was it 3, 2, 1? Whatever it was, let me know down below. We're going to talk about that very shortly. I'm also going to dive into all of the hidden things I found throughout the trilogy. And then at the end of the video, we're going to talk about what's next for Fear Street. Let's jump in. Spoilers ahead. Directed by Lee Yaniak, Fear Street is a horror trilogy based on the teenage horror series written by R.L. Stine. The 3 films were shot back to back with the intention of being released in cinemas in June 2020, but they were pulled because, well, 2020. After this, the distribution deal they had ended, and then Netflix acquired the rights, leaving Fear Street to be pushed to a 2021 VOD release, with the films being released over a 3-week span. The trilogy starts in 1994 with Part 1, where we follow a group of friends who encounter an ancient plot that has cursed their town of Shadyside for over 300 years. Now evil is after them, and they look to the past for answers. Part 2 takes place in 1978 in a summer camp where evil affects another generation. And then finally, we have Part 3 that takes place in 1666, where we see the origin of evil leading back to accusations of witches and a pact with Satan. Only after the 3rd installment do we fully understand all the pieces of the puzzle, resulting in true evil being revealed. I loved the trilogy. It was slick, it was fun, it was well put together, and it was actually surprising. Obviously, the whole good is evil. I loved that aspect, but here is how I would rank the films. My 3rd favorite is Part 2. I enjoyed the relationship between the sisters, but I felt like it took a while for things to get going. I do have to acknowledge, with being the middle piece of the story, the film didn't exactly get that great reveal payoff, and although it got to lead into its own chapter and own story, it also had to use some of its time to make sense of the story before it, connecting both stories in a short time. But no complaints, it really just wasn't my favorite. I did enjoy the character of Ziggy. I think that Sadie Sink is amazing and she was really well fitting to this role. I also thought the kills were amazing in this film. My 2nd favorite is Part 1. I saw a few comments and I received some DMs about people not loving Dina as the lead, but I have to disagree. I thought she was a straight shooter and she was brave, and most of all, she had those certain flaws that made her realistic. She actually gave me Tree vibes from Happy Death Day. I love the setup of the first film and the unexpected gore. That bread scene was everything. And of course, I was a big fan of the soundtrack, which a lot of you have asked me about. People obviously are quick to comment on the fact that the music in the soundtrack did indeed come out after 1994, but I don't think that that's really what they were after. I didn't find this to be an issue for me because I felt like the film was aiming to give the feel for the decade, and rarely do soundtracks take this into account for other films. For example, something like 2018 Suspiria, which is based in 1977, doesn't even have music to match that decade. The soundtrack is done by Tom York, which is very modern music, but I think that the fact it's called 1994 throws a lot of people off. So I do get the criticism, but I'm a huge fan of 90s music, so I was willing to take it. The film was so captivating from the start. I loved the characters and I had no idea where it was going. It was fast, it was sleek, and it was just really interesting, which made me so surprised that Part 3 is my favorite. I was honestly floored by how well this series wrapped up. I have to say, I didn't have high hopes because I liked the first one so much. I really didn't think they could outdo that while trying to wrap it all up. I expected it to be not ambiguous, but at least a little bit open with the curse and the evil just being plain evil. I loved the explanation for everything, and although some of it was predictable, they managed to tie in some twists that were completely unexpected. And I loved how they linked up all of the locations in the film as well. It really felt like everything was tied up, and it felt very purposeful and well written. Having the actors play dual roles, I know this didn't work for everyone, and it did feel a little bit strange, but I think they managed to explain it very well by having Dina reliving Sarah's life through her own shoes and understanding her truth. It made it very compelling and surprisingly original for a slasher that is giving homage to so many other films. I also really liked the brutality of the third one. It was something I just really enjoyed. Somehow the series seemed to bring elements audiences love in fun, slick, modern slashers like Ready or Not or Happy Death Day, and then somehow transform them into this amazing original structure, going back in time and then tying it back up with itself, giving you a surprise 1994 Part 2. This is why I loved Part 3. It was such a dynamic installment of the series and had a lot of ground to cover in only 1 hour and 54 minutes. I really enjoyed the pacing and the variety. I have seen a lot of comments from other people who are ranking them. I have a Discord in my Patreon, and so many of us liked them in different orders, and I think it is such a cool moment for horror where we can sit and reflect on that and just really show our personal taste by how we rank these films. It's so exciting. Speaking of finding something you love in each film, I sat down and went through the films again, trying to find any pieces I didn't pick up the first time round, and also I wanted to break down the inspirations for the films, the horror films they nod to along the way. Obviously, there's a lot of R.L. Stine Easter eggs, or just eggs in general. Some of them are pretty obvious, so let's jump into all of the references in the Fear Street trilogy. So we all know that Fear Street is based on the series by R.L. Stine, but the movies themselves aren't actually based on any particular stories from this book series. Instead, they're intended to capture the vibe and tone of the series. But that doesn't mean they don't take every opportunity to pay homage to R.L. Stine and of course other horror films that inspired the modern slasher. Here are some of my favorite examples of hidden meanings that point to the chilling conclusion of the show that you may have missed the first time watching. And of course, homages to R.L. Stine and inspiration from other horror movies. In the opening scene of the first movie, one of the first things we see is The Wrong Number. This is a book that is being bought by a woman in the bookstore. Heather is serving her, and the woman refers to this book as trash lowbrow horror. This is actually the 5th book of the Fear Street series, setting up the films for a tongue-in-cheek attitude. And Heather actually flips the customer off after she is leaving the store because of her comment about the series. This bookstore is the perfect setup for the series because of course it can display collections of the R.L. Stine series. And this leads into Heather being stalked and stabbed by the first villain that we see. And Heather does not hesitate to use one of the books from Fear Street as a shield. I've seen people refer to Heather's early death as a call to Scream, where it's traditional to have the opening scene, such as Drew Barrymore in the first one, who we think is going to be our main final girl, but is killed off. The first villain we see in the film is actually inspired by R.L. Stine's Halloween Night 2, which is from the Point horror series. A little bit later, not much of a hidden message, but this one is a nod to what's to come. The board tells us the whole story that Josh has already put together himself. What a clever dude. But it also points out the years that Part 2 and Part 3 take place in. A little bit later, we also see 1666 reappear as the year the town was settled. This is perhaps my favorite point to the twist of the trilogy. In the first film, we see Good standing on the podium, which has Satan on it. This, of course, is the Sunnyvale mascot, and yes, it's very on the nose, but But just in case you were ever second guessing, there's also 2 posters screaming good on the side. We're given another angle a little bit later where we're able to read one of these signs, which says building better futures. Obviously, this is a throw to the sacrificial nature of the good family who are building their futures off the blood of shady siders. Themes of the film Halloween can be seen throughout this series. Of course, it is following a similar subject matter, but some of the shots seem very inspired by the cinematography of the 1978 slasher. And of course, the idea of Kate who is babysitting, which is a similar setup to Halloween. I would say that this is just similar, but there are so many interesting shots with the 2 friends having conversations over the phone just a few houses away. What I think is really hilarious though is the fact that Kate drops off the children to keep them safe, which is a very off-brand thing for the babysitter to do in a horror movie. Very smart. Later we get our first snippet of the Camp Night Massacre. This is an obvious reference to Baghead Jason from Friday the 13th, but we find out in the second film how he gets this look, and it's indeed done by Ziggy, who tries to strangle Tommy. This also might be reaching, but I do think I might be onto something. The lighting on this shot really reminds me of the classic closet scene in Halloween. Let me know if you think I'm reaching there. The next flash afterwards is the milkman murderer, along with the suburban white picket fence and the full blue boiler suit. It's just like Michael. And then we see, and I'm quoting here, deformed boy bashes heads, which seems like again a mix of Michael and Jason. The idea of Jason's deformity and Michael's outfit. The next villain that is introduced to us is the Grifter, who seems to be murdering someone in the lake. Again, a very strong reference to Jason. A little bit later in the film, once we've learned that these villains can respawn, we see this happen in a very interesting way, and I think that this respawning could be referenced to Frank rising from the floor in Hellraiser. Let me know what you think. This is just my own speculation. A little bit later on, we see the Camp Night villain axe through the door, and it's almost a reference to The Shining, and I just wish they added in an additional shot. What do you guys think? I think it's the axe and the door. It just had the entrance. The friends escape the school and they head to the store. Here you can see there is a receipt next to the prescription drugs, which is very interesting because on the receipt it says Clarissa Morley, which could be a reference to Senior's Fear Street book Last Chance, which is about a character called Mr. Morley. And the book that came before this one actually has a main character called Clarissa. This could just be a coincidence, but I thought it was very interesting that these books come one after the other. And then the last reference that I found in the first Fear Street was the mixtape, which side B is titled, Hey, Must Be a Devil Between Us. This is indeed lyrics from a song from the Pixies, but it's also kind of a reference to Good making a pact with the devil, which turns Shady Side and Sunny Side against each other. And also how their relationship was used against them in 1666 by the Good's pact with the devil. I think that part 1 is mostly a call to Halloween, but part 2 is definitely a call to all 80s and 70s slashers. But of course, with the summer camp setting, Friday the 13th is the most iconic. It also calls to the slashers' rules about having sex and being killed off. I'm not sure if you picked this up, but pretty much all of the shady siders who get mildly raunchy die. This is everyone but Ziggy, who has a makeout session with Goods himself, which I guess is a hint. In this film, Ziggy also references Carrie, and she plans to, quote, carry her bully. But a young Good talks her out of it. But don't worry, we do get our revenge later. Of course, in the last film, she finally gets her blood bucket moment. And fortunately, Good is the target. Later in the film, the first kill of the film, unfortunately, Arnie, he gets the axe. But in this shot, we see something behind Tommy. Yes, I think that is a call to Blair Witch. Let me know what you think. One of my favorite homages in the film is when Ruby Lane creeps up this trapdoor, which has to be a homage to the Evil Dead. Her hand placement and the fact that they used a female killer to do it, it's just spot on with the 1981 scene. And then there's of course one more connection you may have missed, you may have picked this up, the connection between 1978 and 1666, where we see kids' bodies lined up all dead. Pretty shocking stuff. And this brings us to the third film. The third installment of Fear Street isn't too much of a reference to films or plays, but it's a portrayal of history. So we've seen this before in a lot of films, including The Witch. And of course, I'm referring to the play as The Crucible. I did that play in high school. I'm very familiar. And I did think it worked with following the same kind of story about a woman being accused and therefore she's a witch because fear-mongering. And it also has the same thing with the kangaroo court deciding their fate. So although I think that there is some kind of loose inspiration, I also think that it's just a period of time as well. If I wanted to, I could reach with this film and say that this scene here reminds me of the scene in Blair Witch Book of Shadows. Big fan of that film. But I really don't think that the third film has as many references as the first and the second. More of a symbol to kind of wrap up things in the last film is when Dina kills Good in the lair and comes out into a house. Of course, this is the house of the Good family, and we can see this by the symbol of the goat, which of course is a throw to Satanism. I'm not sure all of these are goats, but there are a lot of beasts with the horns. But don't worry friends, it might not be over. There might be more Fear Street to come. The director has already expressed interest in expanding the franchise, and there's been some talk about how this could involve a spin-off focused on the milkman, so that would be set in the 50s. There's also been some actors that have expressed some interest in returning. And I think with the success of Fear Street, there's probably more to come. What do you guys think? Should we leave it as it is, or do you want to explore more of this kind of horror? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did like it, please give it a like and share it with a friend. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, I'd love to have you here. I do new videos every single week talking about horror movies, talking about thrillers, breaking films down, and also giving you a lot of recommendations to put on your to watch list. The fun thing about horror is there's always something new to talk about. Thank you guys so much for being here today and watching this video, and I'll talk to you very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye friends.